The silent scream. Have you ever looked into eyes that scream without making a sound? Eyes that ask questions the world is too afraid to answer? In a remote African village, where the sun burns, the earth without mercy and the nights are filled with whispered prayers, lived a young boy named Kofi. His feet were always bare, hardened by dust and broken stones, yet softer than the pain he carried inside. Every step he took on those endless dirt paths echoed the same unanswered question in his heart. Is being poor a sin? Life in Kofi's village was not lived, it was endured. Mornings began with hunger, not hope. The air smelled of dry soil and exhaustion. And dreams were a luxury no one could afford. Water came from miles away, and food was measured in patience rather than portions. Children learned silence before they learned to speak, because even words were expensive here. Kofi's mother woke before sunrise every day. She would place an empty pot on the clay stove, stare at it for a moment, and then look up at the sky as if waiting for a reply. She rarely cried. Tears required energy, and energy required food. Instead, she breathed deeply and carried on. Kofi watched her quietly. He never asked why the pot was empty. He already knew the answer. That day, something unusual happened. The village trembled with a strange noise. Engines, laughter, unfamiliar voices. Large vehicles rolled in, shining under the harsh African sun. People stepped out wearing clean clothes, bright smiles and shoes that had never known dust. Kofi froze. He had never seen such things so closely before. Children his age laughed freely, holding snacks in their hands, crumbs falling carelessly to the ground. Kofi didn't feel jealousy. He felt hunger, not just in his stomach, but deep in his soul. For the first time, he wondered what it felt like to eat without fear of tomorrow, to sleep without the weight of emptiness pressing against his ribs. His hands tightened unconsciously, as if holding onto an invisible piece of bread. Then, in that single fragile moment, someone noticed him. A pair of eyes met Kofi's, eyes that didn't look away, eyes that didn't judge. That one glance carried the power to change everything. This is where the story begins. Not with wealth, not with miracles, but with a silent scream and a question that would challenge the very meaning of humanity. A mother's prayer. Kofi's mother believed in prayers more than promises, because promises had failed her too many times. Her hands were rough, cracked from years of carrying water, grinding grain, and holding on to hope when everything else slipped away. Yet when those same hands touched Kofi's head, they were gentle, almost sacred. Every morning before the sun rose, she would place her palm on his hair and whisper the same words. Be patient, my child. God sees us. Hunger lived with them like a silent guest. It sat beside them when they ate, slept between them at night, and woke them before dawn. Kofi's mother knew hunger well, not just the kind that twisted the stomach, but the kind that broke the spirit. She had learned to smile through it, to move through the day without letting it show. But at night, when Kofi was asleep, her strength collapsed. She would sit beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a blessing. Sometimes he whimpered in his sleep, his body curling in on itself, as if even his dreams were cold. That was when her heart hurt the most, not because she was hungry, but because her child was. She often skipped meals without telling him. When Kofi asked why she wasn't eating, she would smile and say she had already eaten earlier. Lies tasted bitter, but truth was unbearable. A mother learns which pain to swallow. That evening, after the strangers arrived in the village, Kofi noticed his mother staring at the sky longer than usual. Her lips moved silently. No tears fell, but her eyes were wet with desperation. Her prayer that night was different. She did not ask for wealth. She did not ask for comfort. She asked for dignity. God, she whispered, do not let my son grow up thinking he is worthless because he is poor. Do not let hunger teach him shame. If someone must suffer, let it be me, but spare his heart. Kofi lay awake beside her, pretending to sleep. He heard her broken voice. For the first time, he understood that his mother's strength was not the absence of pain, but the decision to carry it alone. Outside, the village was quiet again. The vehicles were gone. The laughter had faded, but something had shifted, softly, invisibly. Kofi held his breath, staring into the darkness, unaware that his mother's prayer had already begun its journey. Because some prayers do not rise loudly, they rise quietly and shake the world when they are answered. The stranger's gaze. The man did not arrive like a hero. He did not wear kindness on his sleeves, nor did he announce his intentions with loud words. He stood quietly among the visitors, observing the village the way one studies a wound, carefully, painfully, honestly. That was when he saw Kofi. The boy sat on the edge of the dusty road, his knees drawn close to his chest, his eyes fixed on the ground as if hope itself had fallen there and broken. Most people passed by without noticing him. Some looked, then looked away. But the stranger's gaze lingered, not out of pity, out of recognition. He had seen that look before, the hollow silence of a child who had learned too early that the world does not owe him anything. The stranger felt something tighten in his chest. He told himself not to interfere. He told himself it wasn't his place. But conscience does not listen to excuses. Slowly he walked toward Kofi. The boy sensed a presence and lifted his head. Their eyes met. Kofi expected judgment or indifference. He had seen both countless times. Instead, he found something unfamiliar, concern without curiosity, kindness without superiority. The stranger knelt down, bringing himself to Kofi's level. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Words in that silence felt too heavy. Then the man reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of bread. Kofi stared at it, unsure. His hands trembled. Hunger urged him forward, but fear held him back. Nothing in his life had ever come without a cost. Slowly, cautiously, he accepted it. The first bite made his eyes sting. Not because the bread was warm or soft, it wasn't, but because it was real. Because it meant someone had seen him. "Do you go to school?" the stranger asked gently. Kofi shook his head. "Why not?" The boy hesitated. His voice was barely audible when he finally answered. "School needs money, and my mother needs food." The stranger closed his eyes briefly. That single sentence carried the weight of an entire system that had failed a child. Around them, the village continued its rhythm. Life did not pause for moments of humanity. But for Kofi, time stood still. The man placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. "You matter," he said simply. 2 words, yet heavier than hunger. As the stranger stood and walked away, Kofi watched him disappear into the crowd, clutching the last piece of bread like a promise. He did not know the man's name. He did not know if he would ever see him again. But something had changed. For the first time in his life, Kofi believed that being poor did not mean being invisible. And sometimes, that belief is the beginning of everything. The test of conscience. The village was never quiet for long. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. Kofi could feel the eyes of others on him. Not the curious ones, but the judgmental ones. Some muttered about the stranger, about the bread, about the boy who dared to accept what was offered. Others smiled faintly, secretly glad he had something to eat. Yet all of it made Kofi shrink into himself. Because attention in his world was often a double-edged sword. That night, as he lay under the thin mat his mother had woven, Kofi thought about the stranger's words. "You matter." The words echoed in the empty corridors of his heart, where hope had been locked away for years. But even hope felt fragile in a village where survival demanded humility and sometimes shame. He worried, will kindness always come with a cost? Will noticing me make them angry? Or worse, make me proud? Meanwhile, his mother prayed silently in the corner, unaware that Kofi had stayed awake. She felt the change in the air, the subtle weight of something good, something dangerous, like the first drops of rain before a storm. She knew that the world had given Kofi a gift, but the village might not understand its meaning. The next morning, Kofi noticed the villagers staring as he walked to fetch water. He held his head high, but his feet were heavy. The bread from the stranger still smelled faintly of hope, and he kept it wrapped carefully in a torn cloth. It was more than food, it was proof that the world could be gentle. Yet, tests came not from strangers, but from those who had always known him. A group of older boys jeered, asking why he had been given something they had not. Their voices cut sharper than the sun's heat, reminding him of the harsh truth. The world could be cruel even in small moments of kindness. Kofi's first instinct was to shrink, to hide. But then he remembered the stranger's gaze, the warmth behind those words. He remembered his mother's prayers through the long nights. For the first time, he realized something powerful. Kindness does not ask for applause. Strength does not demand attention. Kofi met the boy's eyes, and without a word, continued walking. Silence became his shield, humility his armor. In that quiet act, he discovered a new kind of courage. The courage to exist fully, even when the world seemed to judge him at every step. By the time he returned home, the sun had risen fully, painting the dusty village in golden light. Kofi placed the bread beside his mother's empty pot. She looked at him, eyes wide with understanding, and whispered, "You are learning, my son. This is your heart's first lesson in humanity." And for the first time, Kofi felt that the world might not only take, but also teach. A changed morning. The next morning arrived differently. It wasn't just the sun rising. It was the quiet shift in Kofi's world, subtle yet unbreakable. The village looked the same, dusty paths, clay huts, the familiar scent of earth baked by the sun. But for Kofi, something had changed. A small spark had been lit inside him, and it refused to be extinguished. He woke to the sound of his mother humming softly. a tune she had long forgotten in the weight of survival. Her hands moved gracefully, despite their cracks and calluses, as she prepared the meager breakfast. Yet today there was something different, a sense of hope she had never let herself voice aloud. For the first time in years, she placed a slightly fuller portion on Kofi's plate, a silent gesture that said, "You are seen, my child." Kofi's stomach was empty, but the hunger he felt this morning was not the same as before. It was tempered by something stronger: faith. Faith in unseen hands, faith in the stranger whose bread had carried more than nourishment, and faith in the prayers his mother whispered every night, unseen yet powerful. As he ate, Kofi felt the weight in his chest lighten just a little. Each bite was a reminder that life could be gentle, even when it was harsh. That day he stepped outside with a new awareness. He noticed the small things, the way the sunlight turned dust into gold, the soft murmur of the wind through the trees, the resilience in the faces of those around him who struggled yet continued. He met the eyes of the other children in the village. Some still stared, some sneered, but Kofi no longer felt invisible. He carried a quiet strength, born from both suffering and kindness, a secret knowledge that the world could hurt, but it could also heal. By mid-morning, Kofi wandered toward the empty field beyond the village. He sat on a small mound, watching the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of possibilities. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond hunger, beyond fear, beyond the dusty limits of his village. Perhaps one day he would go to school. Perhaps one day he would eat without shame. Perhaps one day the world would recognize him, not as a poor boy, but as someone worthy of hope. He picked up a small stone and held it tightly in his hand, not because it had value, but because it reminded him of something his mother had always said: "Even the smallest things can carry strength if you believe." That evening, when Kofi returned home, his mother met his eyes with a smile that spoke louder than any words. He had carried something invisible from the outside world into their home: courage, faith, and a faint glimmer of joy. For the first time, Kofi understood a profound truth. Life would not always be easy, but kindness, whether received or given, could change everything. And that small, precious understanding was the beginning of his transformation. Reunion and triumph of humanity. Weeks turned into months, but the change in Kofi was permanent. The village remained the same in appearance: dusty paths, clay huts, and the relentless sun. But Kofi's world had expanded far beyond the horizon. He no longer carried hunger alone. He carried hope, courage, and the quiet knowledge that someone had seen him and believed he mattered. Every morning he walked to the field beyond the village, practicing reading letters and words he had learned from borrowed books. Education was a luxury, but Kofi understood that it was also a lifeline. His mother watched from the doorway, her hands folded, her heart swelling with silent pride. She no longer saw just a starving boy. She saw a child who had survived despair and embraced possibility. One afternoon, the stranger returned. Kofi recognized him immediately, though the man's face now carried a gentle familiarity rather than the weight of the unknown. He held a small bundle, not food this time, but supplies for learning: paper, pencils, and a notebook. Kofi's hands shook as he accepted them. The gesture was simple, yet it carried more meaning than any feast ever could. "You've grown," the stranger said softly, "and you've learned something important. That strength doesn't come from wealth. It comes from enduring, hoping, and choosing kindness, even when no one else notices." Kofi nodded, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time, he understood that life's greatest gifts were not measured by what one receives, but by what one chooses to carry forward. That evening, the village gathered. People who once sneered at the boy's hunger now whispered, quietly among themselves, realizing that kindness and courage could shine even in the humblest of hearts. Kofi's mother stood beside him, her palms pressed together, eyes glistening with tears. She had prayed for this moment silently for years, never imagining it would arrive with such beauty. Kofi looked at the sun setting over the horizon, its orange glow reflected in his eyes, and he felt the warmth of every small miracle that had led him here. Hunger had once defined him, poverty had tried to confine him, but now, the boy who once wondered if being poor was a sin, had learned the greatest truth of all. Humanity is not about what you have, but about what you give, what you endure, and the courage to rise above despair. As night fell, Kofi's mother held his hand tightly. "You've done more than survive, my son," she whispered. "You've reminded the world that even the smallest heart can carry immense love." And for Kofi, the silent screams of the past transformed into quiet strength. He was no longer invisible. He was seen. He mattered. And in that realization, the village, the world, and the boy himself had won.